Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to the open door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. Open to the love of God, open to joining His stream of love for others. And now the panel will introduce right now, beginning with Dr. Rhonda Chervin, Professor of Philosophy at Holy Apostle, retired from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and is a dedicated widow and has written numerous books about Catholic living. Then we have a couple of guests we'll talk about in just a moment. But here's our fearless leader, Dr. Jim Hannock from Los Angeles, philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. Al Hughes, who's usually with us, has a very important meeting today, so won't be with us. But you have a guest today, Jim.
Yes, I'm happy to welcome Mr. Christopher Hunt, and Chris is a member of the American Solidarity Party, and he brings with him a different sort of background than at least some of the people that we've discussed and met with before. Christopher is involved in work with boats in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm sure he has a lot of practical insights for us, especially because today we're talking about stewardship of the environment. And it may be that we'll have another guest or two drop in as the hour proceeds. What I've done in the past is what I'd like to do today. I'd like to begin by simply reading the preamble for the party plank on stewardship of the environment. And then if there are any reflections just from that one short paragraph, we can look to those reflections. And then we can move ahead point by point. And I think that the very first point is one that might lead to some back and forth discussion. At any rate, the platform begins with this paragraph. We believe in the responsibility of every generation to serve as stewards of the earth. We recognize the intrinsic value of nature. We must work to fix the deficits of the past, act as responsible managers in the present, and ensure for future generations a planet that is healthy and thriving. We reject discredited warnings of an overpopulation crisis and believe that human beings are fully capable of building a society that is populous, developed, and permanently sustainable. Let me call attention to a couple of points that are pretty obvious but maybe could use some underscoring in this first paragraph. First of all, the responsibility that goes across generations. There are famous descriptions of what the human enterprise is like that emphasize the coming together of the past generations, the present generation, and the generations of those yet to come. And then the idea of stewardship. It's one thing to claim absolute control over something, and it's another thing to function as, to serve as a steward. And then the idea of intrinsic value of nature. In one sense, of course, the value of everything that's created is ordered to God. In that sense is the primary sense, but nonetheless, within the whole range of creation, we can make a distinction between something that's, well, meant to be an instrument and something that is meant to be of value in and of itself, although it might very well serve the needs of others. So what we're saying here is that nature itself has an intrinsic value. And then this idea of fixing the deficits of the past. As we know, there's been a lot of talk in the last week, and important talk about America's original sin of racism. There are deficits of the past, and while we can't change history, we can try to alter the ill effects of the past. And then we come to this idea of rejecting the claim that there's an overpopulation crisis. It could well be that there are population centers that need to be decentralized, but that all things considered, there's an overpopulation crisis. That's something that the party rejects. And we have faith that the human enterprise can be rich and multiple and sustainable. So that's our first paragraph, and that's an impromptu gloss on that first paragraph. And I can report that the car that I've been traveling in has come to a stop. So what do you think, panel?
This is Dr. Rhonda, and I have a lot of difficulty with this thing in this way, that I've never gotten a totally satisfactory answer to this question. Okay, I have people I know who are vegetarians, and they claim that since animals have this high intrinsic value, we shouldn't be killing them and eating them, right? So I was pondering this issue at the dentist's office, and I talked to the dentist about this, and he said, look, you have sharp teeth that are carnivore teeth. So we're meant to eat animals. We're not just meant to eat grass, okay? So then the question becomes, are these sharp teeth, did they only come after original sin, or was it God's original plan that animals would eat other animals, we would eat other animals, all this, Because I see this since I can't get a good resolution on that issue, as to whether you could say, okay, there's original sin, but we want to be redeemed people who overcome original sin. Well, when you say permanently at the end of that paragraph, by the way, for sake of Chris and other listeners, I did join the party. It's not that I'm against what the party says. It's just I need a lot of elucidation. So, okay, permanently sustainable. Well, according to Revelation, there's an end to this world, and it's not permanently sustainable. And so, the word permanently sustainable has a flavor to me of that life on earth is eternal, which is heretical. So now, I know this isn't a religious party as such, but given that some of this is a Catholic radio program discussing this whole thing, I would like to know the opinion of all three of you who are on, or anyone who calls in, about this basic issue, because, the thing to say, well, because I value your intrinsic worth, dear pig, I'm going to slaughter you and eat you tomorrow. That seems to me very illogical.
Well, Christopher, since you're a first-time guest, I think you should answer those questions.
Okay. Well, for a couple of things. One thing, the permanently sustainable, that also, to me, is problematic in the sense that it sounds very utopian, and also for the same reason that that she mentioned is the Earth, or we're not going to be here forever. There is going to be a second coming, and so, and not only that, like, it also to me sounds like the idea, like a utopian idea of entering back into the Garden of Eden. So I think it might have been an imprudent choice of words for that exact part. Now, as for things such as the vegetarian issue, and the whole thing of whether or not people ate meat before or after the fall, I don't think there will ever be an answer to that question until you're face to face with Christ. But I could say this: although you could get like full protein out of the plant kingdom, like with quinoa or hemp seed or amaranth, things like that, although it's a full protein, it's not a quality protein. So the only place where you could actually get quality protein, unless you're having something like a protein isolates from that you're buying like at GNC or something, you can't get quality protein. Like, for instance, eggs are the best protein across the board. They're rated at 100, right? Which is the highest, the best protein in the natural world. And then the only thing above that would be whey isolate and casein isolate, right? So really, I'm not against it, but I was a vegetarian for 4 years. But it's not. I don't think that it's a moral issue, you know. And our bodies really need animal protein. So that's what I think about those two issues in general. There's some other things I would like to talk about in that first paragraph, but I know y'all wanted to have everybody talk about those specific issues first. So I guess that's my answer to those questions there.
I've never heard that answer. That's very helpful. Thank you. By the way, steak is my favorite food, so it's not because I'm a vegan.
Full disclosure. A couple of thoughts I have there. I think the language permanently sustainable isn't directed to a utopia on Earth or meant to deny that we have here no lasting home. I think it's language used to challenge the position of those who say, very well, we might have made it to the year 2017, but given projections, we won't make it to the year 2117. I think the idea here is to say that we can continue to feed the population of the Earth, and that it's not just that we've been lucky so far, but that we can be confident that we can continue to do so. I don't think it is meant to have any eschatological meaning. In terms of the vegetarians and the vegans and the like, it would seem to me that someone who's a vegetarian could be a vegetarian for many reasons, and one of the reasons might be to give witness to the worth of other mammals, and I think that's perfectly legitimate. At the same time, I think that we, in recognizing that everything that is has an intrinsic value, we can also say that the intrinsic value is ordered. It's an ordered intrinsic value. It's not as if to say that X, Y, and Z all have intrinsic value is to say that there can't be any ordering within that range of intrinsic values. and an analogy, and you know every analogy limps. But if we consider an orchestra, every piece in the orchestra has a value, and it's an instrumental value in some regards, but an intrinsic value in other regards. Each piece in the orchestra helps the other pieces in the orchestra. But some pieces are really of a higher intrinsic value. If the first violinist can't make it and there's no first violin tonight, there's a problem. And if the third piccolo player can't make it tonight, although the piccolo contribution is of intrinsic value, there's not so great a problem. There certainly is an ordering here. And I think it's of note to see that Pope Francis, with regard to this very point, says something that I think is really significant. I'm just quoting from paragraph 90 of Laudato Si. Paragraph 90, he says, having made a point about how we are in a harmony with all of nature, point 90 says, paragraph 90 says, this is not to put all living beings on the same level, nor to deprive human beings of their unique worth and the tremendous responsibility it entails, nor does it imply a divinization of the earth, which would prevent us from working on it and protecting it in its fragility. Such notions would end up creating new imbalances which would deflect us from the reality which challenges us. At times, we see an obsession with denying any preeminence to the human person. More zeal is shown in protecting other species than in defending the dignity which all human beings share in equal measure. Certainly, we should be concerned lest other living beings be treated irresponsibly, but we should be particularly indignant at the enormous inequalities in our midst, whereby we continue to tolerate some considering themselves more worthy than others. So I think Pope Francis in Laudato Si is very much aware of a kind of false equality that's proposed across the whole range of living beings. And I don't think that this is something that flies in the face of what we might call a common morality. Suppose you ran across some child who was doing something strange, and you asked him, just what is it that you're doing? Because you think you see what he's doing, but you want to ask him, just what is it you're doing? And he says, oh, I'm pulling the wings off of butterflies. I have 25 of them here, and I'm working my way through them. Would you like to help? Now, if he said, well, I'm pulling weeds, and I've counted 25 of them. I usually count a lot more. Would you like to help? You might say no, but keep at it. Whereas with the butterflies, I think you'd say no, and let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah. No. I agree. Like that. The statement wasn't meaning like you were saying, wasn't meaning like something utopian or eschatological. But I just think that, as the good doctor mentioned, was the using the word permanently. Although I can't say I know, but I'm pretty certain that when it was written, it wasn't meant that. But I could see how it could sound like that.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and words. I mean, words are important.
They sure are. They sure are.
But I think one of the big things in here too to look at is like when it comes to the intrinsic value of nature, and now the whole reason I came to the ASP is because I was looking for something that goes along with the Catholic social doctrine, right? And so, like when I see like the intrinsic value of nature, and we talk about solidarity and in the Catholic social doctrine, that also means that when you're looking at the intrinsic value, like for instance, we like here in the United States, we have so many natural resources, right? And those natural resources don't only belong to the United States. The natural resources in Mexico don't only belong to Mexico. The natural resources in the Middle East don't only belong to the Middle East. They belong to the entire world, and they also belong to the poor parts of the world. And in that, we can't deny those places and those peoples who don't have those resources in their land. We can't deny them the use of those resources morally, because as humans, as the people that God created, and this earth being given to us, there's a universal ownership of those things to an extent. So they can't just be kept away from those people who can't, quote unquote, afford it. Which I don't know exactly how to make that work out in a way that's truly just or not. But I think that's one of the things too when we're talking about recognizing the intrinsic value of nature and looking at that in the view of the name of the party, the American Solidarity Party. That's just like some thoughts that I have. I know a lot of the ideas in the Catholic social teaching seem unobtainable to an extent, but I don't think they are. I think that they are attainable, but only with the working grace of God. But that's kind of what we want to do with the American Solidarity Party is to enter into the true justice, and not the new social justice spirit, but the real spirit of what we find in the social teaching of the church. I know we're not only Catholics in the American Solidarity Party, and the American Solidarity Party is not a Catholic party per se, but it was founded on the Catholic social doctrine, as far as I understand, which is what really brought me into the party.
Yes, I think that's what brought many people into the party. But by the same token, I think a good number of people are in the party because of social principles that are connected with various Protestant groups. And in particular, there's the Calvinist thinker Abraham Kuyper, who in many regards I think is mirroring Catholic social thought. And your point of optimism, Christopher, I think is the point of optimism in this last sentence of the preamble. Human beings are fully capable of building a society that is populous, developed, scratch permanently, and sustainable. We can do it. It's not a hopeless endeavor. Of course, all of this is premised in terms of God's sustaining action, but we know we couldn't take the next breath without God's support, so that's understood. But maybe we can look at another point, the very first point of the platform after the preamble, because I know, Chris, you have some real doubts about this. It reads, the scientific consensus that human beings are causing instability in the global climate, that is to say, we therefore support, we agree with the scientific consensus that human beings are causing instability in the global climate. We regard this as a humanitarian crisis that must be addressed without delay by the world's wealthiest nations, including the United States. But you're not so sure about that consensus.
Well, it's not that I'm unsure. I mean, there is not really a consensus. I mean, there's many people that don't agree that it's caused by humans. Now, with that, and there's also time and time again, there's data that's being manipulated and faked over and over again, and they keep getting caught. For the last several years, how many times has these different organizations been caught fudging the numbers to make it look like what they want it to look like, to cause what they want it. Now, I believe that what they're trying to do is probably like for good reason, like, okay, well, we want to do what we can to not pollute and to save our ecosystem for future generations. And I agree with their desires. I just think that the ends don't justify the means. I think that it's got to be done with honesty, and I also think that we have a responsibility, regardless of global change or not. I mean, the global climate change, that happens. It always happens. It's always going to happen, whether we're here or whether we're not here. But we, as the stewards of the earth, have to do our part to take care of what was given to us to take care of. And I think that it's irrelevant whether or not we are causing climate change in the sense of where our responsibility lies. Like, if we are not causing climate change at all, we still need to not be polluting the air. We still need to not be polluting the rivers. We still need to not be polluting the oceans. And so I think either which way, the responsibility is still there for the same purposes. But to go out there and make that statement that scientific consensus has this, it's not a scientific consensus. It's a media consensus. So the media is not the scientific world, and there are many people in the scientific world that say, hey, no, I don't believe in this, and this is complete hogwash. So that's the only reason I don't agree with that point. I agree with the intentions, but I don't agree with the statement, and I don't agree. Like, I really do not know whether we're causing climate change or not. I've read so many things, and I've watched so many things, and I've watched, so there's so much contradiction there, and then I see all the lies that are uncovered by investigative journalists and stuff, and it's like, okay, so the people that are pushing the global warming agenda are constantly getting caught making false statements, changing data to fit their models, and so on and so forth. But so you see where I'm kind of don't like that part.
Could I make one point of clarification, or ask you to make it? Do you think there's a consensus among, another fancy word, climatologists? Is there a consensus among scientists whose expertise is in this very area? I'm well aware that there's not a consensus among scientists across the board, but a good number of the scientists who seem to challenge the claim that there is man-made climate change are from very different sciences.
Yeah,
Hi, this is Mitzi Helmer. I apologize for joining late.
We heard that ping, Mitzi.
We're happy to have you. Happy to have you.
Very, very much apologize. I got caught up at something in the office.
Mitzi, to the listeners, as you remember, Mitzi is a lawyer. and she had to leave, as I'm going to have to leave 5 minutes early because I've got to go to something at 9 o'clock, and I'm seeing where this place is that I've got to go to. I'm right in front of it. At any rate, I was kidding, Mitzi. I said you'd probably been served a subpoena last time around and had to leave.
No. Well, the serving with the subpoenas is pretty normal, but
that wouldn't make you leave.
But no, we do have, when it's an emergency, it's an emergency. That's for sure.
That's right. Now we've come at this point to the first bullet in the stewardship of the environment plank, and it reads again, the scientific consensus that human beings are causing instability in the global climate. We support that view. We regard this as a crisis that must be addressed, etc. Now, Christopher Hunt wants to say that he's not so sure at all that there's a scientific consensus. He thinks that there's a growing consensus in the media, but he's not so sure that there's a scientific consensus. And I just asked him a minute or two ago whether there's a scientific consensus among climatologists. And he was about to reply to that, and we heard a ping.
Yeah, with that, I don't know if there's a consensus with climatologists, but really, like as I said earlier, like whether or not there is human-caused global climate change, we as people need to take the same steps anyways, because we need to protect our environment for all the future generations and for our current generation. But so as for the climatologists, I really don't know. Like for a long time I was convinced that it was man-made, then I was convinced the other way, and then I was reading and watching and reading and watching, and I just came to the point to where, me not being a scientist, and reading and seeing all these different things, I just came to the conclusion that I can't figure it out, and I can't know. I personally can't know this or not, and therefore my stance is simply that we need to be good stewards of the environment, no matter what, whether or not we're causing climate change or not causing climate change. We need to take the steps to be good stewards of the earth.
All right.
So, Christopher, you disagree with like this off-sided number that 97% of climatologists believe that the climate change is being caused by human action?
No, my whole point is I don't know if it is. I just came to the conclusion that after reading so many things on it and watching so many things on it, that I am unable to come to a conclusion on whether or not it's human caused or not human caused. And really, like my whole stance on the thing is going to be the same no matter what. We need to take care of the earth. We need to take care of creation. And so to me, I find the climate change aspect irrelevant when it comes to the actions that ought to be taken to protect and be good stewards of the earth.
Well, I think it does become relevant, though, when we're talking about regulating carbon emissions. If you've got a bunch of scientists saying, okay, look, it's these carbon emissions are causing the planet to heat up, and they're going to cause widespread environmental devastation, flooding, superstorms, etc. We need to cut carbon emissions specifically. I mean, I think that's where it's important to be clear that, where we stand on this. I mean, obviously we all need to recycle and, reduce, reuse, recycle, that sort of thing. But, when you talk about the scientific consensus about man-made climate change, I think that's where it does come up, is when we're talking about whether we need to have strict policies to reduce carbon emissions.
One consideration with regard to the fundamental commitment of the party to subsidiarity is that what we can do on a local level, we should do on a local level. But at the same time, what we can't do on a local level, we need to do at a different level, a higher level, a national level, an international level. So to a certain extent, we could reduce individually and as a family, say, as a neighborhood, carbon emissions. But there's so much in that regard that we can't do at a local level that has to be a matter of national policy. So it does seem like it's at that level a really pressing consideration. But I'm sure the discussion will continue, and what we've looked at so far is the preamble and just the very first point. Sometimes it's interesting to go to the very last point. And the very last point in the platform is something that's also received a lot of attention lately. It reads, we support the input of indigenous populations in land use deliberations. We therefore support the input of indigenous populations in land use deliberations. Here's an analogy, and I used one before, and I said that every analogy limps. We're having in Los Angeles, and this is a good thing overall, a development of light rail transit, subways that aren't subways, trains that go hither and thither across the city. And it just so happens that one of them is going right past, as in within 30 yards of the front door of our parish church. And let's call our parish an indigenous population. And what was done was we did some negotiating, and we recognized that it's a good thing that there be this light transit going right past the front door of the church, but the transit officials agreed that there doesn't have to be a station to let people off and to allow people to get on right there in front of the church. If for no other reason than there'd have to be a large parking lot right there in front of the church that would have nothing to do with the church. Now,
wow. What a wonderful possibility of evangelization. Everyone in the church gets out there with the literature and talks to everybody as they walk onto the L. I think that's terrific. Big sign, huge sign on the church saying Catholics come home.
We could do that, or we could go 3 blocks away to the Department of Motor Vehicles, where there's always a huge line, and where, I might add, Los Testigos de Jehová, the Jehovah's Witnesses, are always evangelizing. But what we would have right in front of our church would be about every 15 minutes a whole lot of noise and a whole lot of people disgorging and a whole lot of people not really paying any attention to the fact that they're right in front of a church. Now, suppose it weren't a church. Suppose it were Holy Cross Cemetery, the largest Catholic cemetery in Los Angeles. And suppose for various reasons it was thought that we ought to have this light rail transport go right through the cemetery. Well, supposing we're indigenous with respect to the planners, I think a lot of people are indigenous with respect to somebody or other. I think we would certainly need to be consulted big time before that would be done. So, Olympian analogy, 2 of them.
Well, I think that, obviously this came up a lot with the Dakota Access Pipeline, and I think a lot of the dispute, obviously had to do with, to what extent this project was going to affect the, I am not an expert about the dispute. Actually, my stepfather was working on that pipeline, I believe, but and I still can't quite make sense of it, but I think it did have to do with kind of access to land that is considered sovereign in a way, and I think that's where it got complicated.
Yeah, wasn't it something about like the river, right? I followed it for a while. I work offshore, so I get long periods of time where I don't have access to internet or anything. But there was something like a river that was like above their land, right? Like it would be affecting the river. I think that's what it was. I might be incorrect there, but
that was part of it. Yeah, they were. I think they were going to be. Yeah, it was very strange. But I think that's where, we specifically talk about the input of indigenous populations. I think what we are. I think hidden in there is this kind of just this respect for the sovereignty of the reservations and their I think that's kind of what that's getting at. But obviously when you're talking about projects that will have an environmental impact, and noise pollution, that sort of thing, we want everyone's input, and this idea of the noise right in front of the church is concerning. But I think we did specifically single out, I think it does single out indigenous populations because of the reservation issue.
Okay, since I absolutely know nothing about this subject, I have just this, man in the street or woman in the street question. Suppose with that Dakota thing, suppose in fact you could prove that there would be thousands and thousands of poor people who would get good jobs because of this thing. And since ownership of land, I believe in the Constitution, includes the thing that if for the common good, there's a need to usurp your land, all that sort of stuff. How does that play out? Suppose you raise it to 1 million people who are now eating just McDonald's hamburgers at the most each day to sustain themselves, would have nice jobs because you did this project. Does that even come into it?
Well, I think that especially with this issue, the whole idea of the reservations, I think that at that point, after what, when we're talking about what Mr. Hannock mentioned in the let me see about we must work to fix the deficit of the past. We really decimated in the United States. We decimated the indigenous populations. So I think that their input when it comes to affecting the little tiny bit of land that we as a country years ago placed them on and said, okay, we killed most of your people and now we're going to give you this land, and then for us to do things that are going to affect them in an adverse way. I think that even though I totally agree that what you're saying has a big part of justice in it, but we also need to look at that situation in that place and in that area and with those people. So I think that the indigenous population in in that respect, deserves more input and more deciding power there. That's just my thought. I mean, I might be incorrect in my evaluation of where the justice is there, but I mean, people do have the right to work. People do have, and so on and so forth. But we have to also look at the whole situation.
Yes, and what the platform says, I think, is very modest in this regard. It reads, "We therefore support the input of indigenous populations and land use deliberations." That seems to be a very, very modest. We know that we're supposed to have a special regard for those who are most vulnerable, and I think reservation life is one of the poorest, economically poor spheres in American society. So to ask for input from people in that situation, I think, is a very modest claim. Now, that's not something that say, I in California can do very much about if it's in Iowa that it's happening or in Montana that it's happening. But it's something that's local governments will have a special interest in. Let me, I know, Rhonda, you were about to say something, but let me add at this point a paragraph from Ed Rushman, who had hoped to join us this morning, and if he couldn't, I said I'd read his input, if that would be okay. And Ed, is giving very serious consideration to running for House of Representatives in Orange County, in a district in Orange County, California. He says this: "It occurs to me that the current environmentalism, green and global warming, is more about finding alternatives and less about sacrifice. It used to be about consuming less, wasting less. Now it's using electricity instead of gas, but that still emits pollutants to make solar panels and all the electronics. Wind turbines require maintenance and create waste, and sometimes are abandoned because the care exceeds revenues. The smaller components for renewables won't get properly recycled, just the gold perhaps. And then the horrible conditions for the workers who mine for battery materials like cobalt. Using less means less money for business and for politicians. Activists don't like conservation because it's boring and doesn't involve new technologies to sell." Now, I don't think he's talking about grassroots activists. Activists don't like conservation because it's boring and doesn't involve new technologies to sell. Using less is always good for the earth. That message doesn't make anyone richer, though. In an imperfect world, love requires sacrifice. In an imperfect world, love requires sacrifice. Seems to me that what Ed is saying is something that actually Pope Francis said. Don't think that there's going to be a technological fix for technological developments that we haven't come to terms with at a moral level. There's not going to be a way out of this by yet another spectacular technological fix. Once upon a time, and neither of our guests were here for that, we talked about the Benedict option. And recently, Archbishop Tartaglia of Scotland has said he prefers the Augustinian option that involves clear confrontation with the powers that be. But at any rate, if we had anything like the ascetic sensibilities of monasteries over the centuries, I doubt if we'd be in the terrible dilemma that we find ourselves in, because I mean the very nature of capitalism is to develop more markets, and developing more markets by its very nature requires more use and more waste. And that's something that's a fundamental problem, and unless we develop a spirit of individual sacrifice, I don't think anything will work at all.
Well, you know, one of the things that I've noticed in my reading, and as I grew up, I actually grew up there in Orange County, but I had a really great.
Which county?
Well, yeah, Orange County. I grew up in
yeah. Okay, I'll tell you.
Okay, I went to this really, really great small private Catholic school called Padre Pio Academy out there in Orange County. And we had a religion teacher, Dr. Graves, and he would always talk. He would talk about like the three people that were like that he would be telling us. These are the people that whose philosophies have been harming the world. And he would say Darwin, Marx, and Freud. And he would talk about that often. He'd talk about Marx, and he'd talk about things such as materialism. And I never really understood materialism. And then recently I read a lot of Marx and Engels, and also I've been reading a lot more about capitalism and the underlying philosophies of capitalism, socialism, and communism is materialism, and I misunderstood what materialism was. I never knew what materialism was. Well, now that I'm starting to understand it, like materialism is not just, I want material things. You know, that's what I thought materialism was. It's just the seeking of material things. But materialism is the philosophy that the only thing that exists is material. Material. There's no such thing as spirit. There is only material. And as the brick is material to build a house, the human is a material to build a corporation. And
except harder to police.
Right. Well, but with that, like in all reality, in like a fully capitalist, socialist, or communist society, people are not spiritual beings. People are simply matter that could think. And since we're simply matter, we don't matter. So those who are more powerful than us can use us to exploit us to get where they want to go, you know. And that's one of the big problems that I have with capitalism. And it's just, and now communism was an answer. Socialism was an answer to the evils of capitalism, but they saw the problem and they pointed the problem out, but then their answer to capitalism was an even greater evil than capitalism, you know. And the more I study the Catholic social teaching, you know, the more I like the ideas of things like distributism and things of that sort, you know. And I think that we do need to combat these corporations and especially the crony capitalism, which we are completely a crony capitalist country, right? So I think what we need to really attack is the philosophy of materialism, right? That's our enemy right there. You know, I don't know.
I like that very much. I would vote for you immediately. I had a different, I was thinking about this thing of the reservations, which is basically I agree with everything you said about the reservations. But then since I come from New York originally, but I now live in Corpus Christi, Texas. So I happened to read a 500-page history of Corpus Christi, Texas, and the immigrants that came and the battles and all these things. So it seems to me if you would make the analogy, would it be right for any Mexican who was run off by the Anglo immigrants who came to Texas and then eventually ran off all the Mexicans who were living there at the time in order to establish Anglo cities, basically. Would any ancestors of those Mexicans be able to claim that they really owned southern Texas and they should come back and take us over and throw us out?
Well, you know, my wife is from Mexico City, and I've actually studied the history of Mexico a lot. And really, like, the whole problem, it wasn't just Texas. I mean, we the United States funded thugs in Mexico who became the Mexican government, and we've been doing this since the earlier 1800s in Mexico. We've been helping people get into power that's going to help us get what we want, either our businessmen, our corporations, or whatever. But there was a meeting that happened. There was a meeting that happened in New Orleans, you know, back in the 1800s, and it was a Masonic meeting. And in that meeting, they made deals with people in Mexico and helped to get those people into power. And part of their deal was, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to help you, and then you're going to sell this whole part of your country to us for $10 million. And so we, the United States, stole half of Mexico, which is including all of California, even, to you know, by doing these deals, you know. And in the early 1900s, well, when we were fighting communism all over the country, we were funding communism in Mexico. We were funding calles. We were funding these regimes that were so evil because these regimes were saying that they were going to be open to what our businessmen over here wanted. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm pretty.
Christopher?
Yeah.
Can I interject just for a minute?
Yes.
I'm about to go into a lay missionaries of charity retreat, and I was just told that there are 3 minutes till the beginning of the liturgy. So I'm going to go. I want to say one thing. As there is all sorts of contention and scholarship and counter-scholarship with regard to climatology, so also there is with regard to the history of Mexican-United States relations. And there's nothing about the party that excuses any of us from doing our homework, and we have a whole heck of a lot of homework to do. And with that teacherly note, I bid you adieu and ask Rhonda to close things up when the time comes, which I think is very shortly. Mitzi and Christopher, thank you very much for joining us. I'll be in touch with you by rapid electronic mail. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jim, for leading this.
Yep.
And so I think what I'm getting is, as maybe the newest member of your party, is what I'm getting is it's probably very good to have these kind of panel discussions so that we get to understand, the implications of things that are in that platform and get to see what it does mean and what it doesn't mean and so forth. I was hoping that since we were arguing about this thing of permanent sustainability, that Jim would say something about, well, this isn't a fixed platform. Things could be edited in the platform, but probably that's true, but he didn't necessarily say so. But still, I'm hoping for people who know very little like me that even if my questions seem captious and sardonic, that you give me good answers so that I can remain in the party. So it's very valuable to me.
We're out of time. And,
okay.
With that, Christopher, you didn't finish your story there, but could you be back next week?
I may be able to. Get a hold of me in email. I'm not sure if I'm going back on show next week or the week after. So
well, get a hold of Jim. Get a hold of Jim and see what he thinks. That would be good to finish that story next week.
Okay, that sounds good.
You have contact with him, right?
Yeah, I have his email right here.
Good. Okay. Thanks to Mitzi. Thanks to Christopher. Thanks to Rhonda. And to Jim. And we'll be back again next week, same time, same station, with the open door. And in the meantime, may God bless us, protect us from all evil, and bring us to everlasting life. Amen.
Amen.
And thank you, Mitzi, also for coming on.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.